I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And you know Adrienne Brodeur's name from her memoir from 2019, Wild Game. Huge hit. All of us paid attention. Everyone's eyes got really big because, well, it's quite a story. And we're going to come back to that in a second. But there is a new novel called Little Monsters set on Cape Cod, and it is the July Barnes & Noble Book Club pick. And I'm going to tell you right now, we are spoiler-free in this conversation. If you want the spoilers, come join us in August. You can find the details on bn.com for that online event, and we will be full of spoilers in that conversation. But here, we're going to hold some cards close. But Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to do my best in this secret-laden book, not to give anything away, but I might mess up.
Well, the good news is, too, we have an editor.
Excellent. Excellent. I love the editors.
But, you know, I was thinking about it over the last couple of weeks as I've been prepping for the show. And part of me wonders, you know, you've got this marvelous Vivian Gornick line that you cited quite often when you were talking about Little Monsters. And I mean, she's Vivian Gornick. Of course, you're going to cite Vivian Gornick. But for the drama to deepen, we must see the loneliness of the monster and the cunning of the innocent. And of course, Little Monsters being the title of the novel. Part of me is wondering, would you have been able to write Little Monsters if you hadn't written Wild Game first?
You're starting with the stumper.
Sorry.
You know, I have no idea, but I will say that there are similarities between what intrigued me about my own story and what was very fun and delightful about writing about a fictional family's secrets. So I'm also very attuned to the gray areas of character. And when I had read that quote by Vivian Gornick while I was working on Wild Game, I mean, I typed it to my computer and it was my North Star. And I'd say, you know, I still feel the same way. I feel like everything I'm curious about is the gray zone. I'm not interested in heroes and villains. I'm all about what is sort of corrupt and courageous in every single character.
And you deliver. You deliver in this Gardner family. So we've got Dad, Alex, and we've got his two children who are adults, Abby and Ken. And Ken is married with two children. Abby is single by choice.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. Before we get too deep into the characters, I'd really like you to sort of describe Cape Cod for folks who are not necessarily familiar with sort of the year-round life on the Cape. I think there are plenty of people who have been to the Cape, obviously, you know, for summers or a week or whatever. But year-round community on the Cape is really different, and that's the world your characters are part of.
It's true. I mean, Cape Cod to me is just such a fascinating landscape. I have not lived there year round, but I've spent every summer of my life there, and I spend time throughout the year because I'm fortunate enough to have a small cabin or a cottage on the Cape. But I mean, it is a place of privilege, obviously. A lot of people come to summer or spend vacations, but it is also a place where people live. But I think always the thing that moves me most about Cape Cod is the natural world there. There is something so powerful about it for me. And I think that comes from the essential fragility of the land. I mean, in essence, it's a sandbar. We all know that it's going to disappear. And each year you see chunks of beach gone, you see rocks moved, but like hour by hour and minute by minute, with the light, with the seasons, with the tides, just the views change all the time. And it's spectacularly beautiful and bountiful. I love to fish and clam and harvest the land. So, you know, it's just a pleasure for me to write about it because I experience it with all my senses.
And I think, too, the Gardners share that.
Yeah.
Love. I mean, Ken might be a little mad that it seems that erosion is coming for his very fancy landscaped lawn, but they're grounded in this place and they are of this place. And I think it really matters because they are a little flinty and I like flinty characters, but they're a flinty family. They are not the easiest to get to know. They have expectations. Adam, he makes a really serious decision early on. This is not a small thing that Adam decides to do.
Sure. And what I'd say is when I started this novel, I wanted there to be something big at stake for every member of the Gardner family. And it's a small family. It's a father and two adult children. The mother died long ago. There's a big moment on the horizon for each of them. So for Adam Gardner, who's the patriarch and a renowned marine biologist, he's about to turn 70, and he's kind of obsessed with his relevancy and I should say fading relevancy. So he's very determined that he wants to make some kind of scientific breakthrough that will ensure his legacy. What we don't know up front is, and each of these characters is also balancing a secret. He has bipolar disorder, and he has made the conscious decision to go down on his medication and to supplement it with his own ideas for what will help him. But in that way, what he's trying to do is connect the dots that his mind is delivering him, all these elusive little ideas and thoughts. He feels that his brain, once it's not anesthetized by the bipolar medication, will be able to make these connections, and he will have his big discovery. And he is very convinced he's on the brink of cracking the code of whale language.
He is a complicated guy.
He is a complicated guy. They all are complicated people.
Which I appreciate. Absolutely appreciate. It's a heck of an opening.
Thank you.
The way you do it with these tiny details. He's meeting a new doctor. He's unimpressed with the doctor's new socks. He's unimpressed with everything. He's very much a guy of his time and of his place. And you have set this novel on Cape Cod with these characters in the summer of 2016, which I think is a pretty great stylistic choice, especially for what you're doing. So can we talk about that decision that you made?
Absolutely. You know, I was working on another book in 2016 that was during the wild game times in my own life. I felt like there was an uneasy mood in the country that just felt palpable and riveting to me. I think you could practically sense that the ground was shifting. And even though I am no political historian or sociologist, I mean, it felt like a global inflection point, and it sort of marked the collapse of an established order and sort of this perfect storm, which enabled some people to reckon with their history and forced other people into deeper denial. But I just remember at that time, even though I was fully one of the people who thought the world was going in one direction, which it did not, I remember at that time thinking a little bit, I didn't have the idea for the novel yet, but I remember just thinking it would be a fascinating moment to set a novel in no small part because I love the idea of readers knowing more than characters. And so it was really thrilling to all the time have these characters, you know, who are either excited about Hillary about to become president or the way the world was going. That's not what happened.
Did you start with the time frame and the place, or did you start with this family? Because this family feels very fully formed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like I could talk endlessly about the creative process and inspiration, and yet it would be still hard to grasp. So I came back from, I was sent home from tour in March of 2020, just like the rest of the world. And I think what I do, or what I'm now, a couple books in, recognize about myself is I start noticing what I notice. Just really where my subconscious goes, where this brain keeps landing, why is it landing there? But I pay really close attention. It's not like I ever come up and think, I am going to write a family drama set in 2016 about X, Y, or Z. It's just, so one of the things that I kept noticing, I was curious about siblings. I was curious about sibling rivalry. I have a lot of friends who have complicated relationships with their brothers or sisters. I, in my own life, have had numerous step siblings. I have a biological brother. Both my parents had half siblings that they didn't know about. Every resting point, that was where my head went. And so I decided to go to the original sibling story of all time, Cain and Abel. And guess what? That story has nothing. Like there is no there. There's such a slim tale. And I remember being sort of, gravely disappointed. Yeah, everyone gives gifts. Father likes one more the other. Where does this murder come from? And then, of course, I realized not right away. But if there was one thing I took from that, it was the structure. So there is this moment, and my novel is the propulsion, the going forward is all about getting to Adam's 70th birthday party, where each of these characters plans to reveal something quite large, and there will be the perception or reality that the father favors one gift over the other. So that's what I took from Cain and Abel. But in terms of you mentioned that the characters seemed fully formed. The only character who was completely fully formed, and it just seems so odd, was Adam. I mean, I could put my hands over the keyboard and channel that man, that 70-year-old bipolar, cantankerous, grandiose, depressed, name it. He was so easy for me. The rest of them was much more, as you would expect, that you have to write quite far into your book to understand people's motivation and to, right. You kind of hold things tightly, but you need to not have the lid on so tight that unexpected things can't happen. And what a character does on any given page, you need to be surprised too. So I had to write quite far for everyone else, but not for Adam.
When you say write really far, are we talking halfway? Or are we talking like how far? At
least halfway. Far? I'd say halfway. And then they come into their own. And then you obviously need to go back with your new knowledge of, well, why is Ken wounded? Okay, if he's wounded about, being a fat kid, and you didn't really discover that till 150, you're going to have to go back and sprinkle some of that in.
Let's start with Ken, actually. He is a very, very complicated guy. Again, also very recognizable, right? Here's a guy who's finally found success, but he always has this little edge where he's thinking, well, now I'm finally better than so-and-so. Like, he just can't live. He's always in competition. And it's not just with his sister. It's not just with he is in competition with the world. I mean, there were a couple of points, too. He has twin daughters, and there are a couple of points where I'm like, are you actually competing with your 13? You are. Oh, wow, you are. But yet, he's not a genuinely malicious guy. He is very complicated. He has layers. There were times where he got on a nerve, which tells me I'm talking about a fictional character like a real person again. So yay you. Yay, Adrienne.
Thank you.
But for you, living with a guy like this, I kept thinking about all of the times you said, empathy was the thing that you came away from after writing Wild Game.
Yeah.
Writing about your very complicated mother. And Ken is really the character that represented that for me in this novel, where you really had to have a lot of empathy as the writer, because otherwise.
And I do have empathy for him. Well, I'll back up and say I have empathy for a lot of men who in recent years had to come to terms with their own privilege and place in this world and think about that some. But I had a lot of empathy in particular for Ken, because he's by far and away the most wounded character in this book. And humans are like all other creatures. They are at their most aggressive when they're wounded. And I really held the Vivian Gornick quote in my mind as I was writing him and thinking about him. But one thing that was really helpful was actually seeing him in his therapist's office. And so we could discover some of these wounds. And, he lost his mother as a young boy, that first female abandonment. He loved his sister too much because his father was kind of crazy and not on the scene. So, even though the sister was younger, they formed this very tight bond and he just adored her. And then she became an adolescent and turned away from him and took his good friend as a boyfriend in the process. So he felt all these abandonments, and it just grew into this rage, this wanting to succeed, this singular determination, which I think we've all seen in a lot of people. And yet there is a vulnerable little boy in there somewhere that, you keep trying to get to. And hopefully you saw a little bit of that at the end.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, everyone gets their arc.
Yes.
Everyone gets their arc, and it's a complete arc. And the way you balance perspectives, and, we've also got an outsider who comes sort of trotting up gently. And she's I'm quite fond of that character. I'm very fond of how you worked her in and gave her space to be the outsider that she is. And that's kind of all we're going to say there, because she's an excellent addition. And the structure of the book, though, so much happens in a rather compressed timeline. I mean, you take us from April through October. When I think about how much happens in this story and what these characters go through, I mean, I love the device of the party, and everyone's moving towards this party because, this is supposed to be fun. And so structurally, did you know when you sat down to do this that you were going to need to alternate POVs and give yourself, I know you based it on the sort of story structure of Cain and Abel, but you still have to give the Gardners their space. You still have to give Adrienne, the novelist, her space. I mean, right. Yeah, you've got the inspiration, but...
I am a pretty intuitive writer, and I don't know if that's because I don't have an MFA or because I feel like most of what I've learned about writing is from reading and being an editor. But I do know that after writing memoir and being in this head and this head alone, it was so fun and so exciting to be in that really super close third person, in the brains of those characters. At first, I thought it was just going to be the father and the two children, and then the outsider, Steph, as she comes in. And then, I found that I was curious about other people. And so, gave Jenny, who's Ken's wife, a few bits. At one point, I gave the therapist, and then I got too far afield and scaled back and pulled it back in. I think what I find so interesting is, on some level, all of these characters are so kind of sure, as we all are in our thoughts. Well, that person smiled at me funny because they must have been thinking that or this or the other. And the fact is, by being able to go into all of these perspectives, it was easy to show how everyone is wrong about the others.
I love Jenny as a character.
Me too. She was so late in the game.
Oh, well, I'm glad you let her in.
I did. I am too.
Glad. Because, I mean, she just surprised me in so many, in the shredding of the fret sheets. The cast felt like it was the perfect size, though. It really did. It felt like I was never spending too much time in one POV. And I liked having that ground shift for me as a reader. There were a couple of points where I felt very sure I knew where something was going. And then I was like, oh, okay. Abby also made some choices that I was like, okay. That's quite excellent.
I'm glad to hear that.
Not what I expected, but I'm quite delighted because they're very Abby things, right? They're very true to who I think you've given us as a character. And I was like, okay.
It is so fun as the writer at this early stage to actually hear what is exciting to a reader, because, it's before I've really talked about the book. It's before I've, a lot of people have read it. So it's kind of like I'm all perked up thinking, okay, she's in, it's just fascinating.
But also, it's fun. I mean, here's the thing. Reading a book for the first time, right, is one, really, really fun. And also, I like sitting with someone's body of work. Now, I have to admit, I have not read your very, very first novel from the early aughts. Slightly more comic than everything, though you are very funny and you have these very wry, I like to think of them as New England moments, being an ex-New Englander myself, but I don't think we can lay claim to it entirely. You have a very wry sense of humor, but seeing Wild Game and Little Monsters, your sentences are great, one. You have a sense of character that I really appreciate because you like that gray area, right? And because you can have empathy for the complicated people. Because I think it would be really easy to just sort of choose sides, right?
Yeah.
When
No,
you sit down to write and you choose a side and it's like, ooh, but is that fun to read? Not so much.
yeah. No, I agree with you there.
So how much of that is sort of your old editorial hat, though? Because you did work in book publishing for a really long time before you flipped sides. And also Zoetrope magazine, you were one of the founders of that quite great literary magazine, which still publishes. So you're doing all of these sort of other bits and pieces before you sit down to do the work yourself. But I don't think you ever really walk away from being an editor. I think it does shape the way you see story. And I'm wondering if that is true for you.
That's so interesting. I have not thought about it that way, but I am sure you are right. And I have remained in the literary world, although I'm not an editor anymore. I run a literary nonprofit called Aspen Words, which is a program of the Aspen Institute. But I do think it's interesting that it really was when I stepped away from editing that I was able to write, because I think it takes so much to sort of put your hands in the dough of someone else's work. One of the things that's been most helpful for me in terms of making space for my writing and figuring out my writing has been to sort of shift my paradigm away from how am I ever going to fit this into my life? You know, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I have a job that I love that's kind of big and all those things. But I think of writing as such a privilege, and it's the one thing I do for myself. So I am one of those people, you know, which does not mean it's easy, which does not mean I'm just smiling as I type. I mean, it's complicated, but it is like, you know, for all of you who exercise or meditate or something, you know, we can only make time for so much, but this actually makes me feel better. And when I'm not doing it, you know, I tend to feel like there's something missing in my life. I mean, I haven't been writing the last few months because I've been so busy sort of participating in the publishing, and I find myself hungry to go back. The way I imagine, you know, anyone who exercised daily feels horrible not doing it for a few weeks.
Okay, but let's shout out your editor for a second. I mean, she has very good taste.
I adore my editor so much. And we actually knew each other before she bought Wild Game. And I remember she and I had a lunch, and she's a friend. She was a good friend. We worked together at Houghton Mifflin. And I remember talking to her and I was like, you know, my agent shouldn't send you this. And she's like, no, absolutely not. That would not be the wise thing to do. And we both sort of nodded. We just agreed on this. And then we got up to leave the restaurant and she turned around and she's like, no, Adrienne, send it to me. And I did. And it was just the best decision ever. And I just feel so grateful and happy that Little Monsters landed with her as well, because she's an editor's editor. She understands the business and knows how to launch something, but she's also just, she gets so deep in the book with you. And I knew that I wanted someone to work with me on the words, not just, you know, pushing it out into the world.
Well, and especially too, I could see how there might be a temptation to let the plot parts drive what you're trying to do, but the characters are so, like, everyone got under my skin in the ways that you want, you know, a fictional character to get under your skin. And, you know, that constant sort of, would I do that? No, I would not do that. And yet
and the characters 100% drove the plot, even though, you know, there was this device of working towards the party. It was the characters who sort of pushed that along. And also, I had no idea going into that party how to unwind the book. And I was surprised by what happened in the end, which was great fun.
It was very satisfying. It was a very satisfying ending.
Thank you.
When I think about Frankenstein for a second, because you do, Frankenstein pops up in unexpected ways in Little Monsters, and I like the way it shows up. But I do want to talk about some of your literary influences, because again, you've been an editor, you work in books now, you've worked in literary magazines. I mean, all of this, and you have always said, read as if everything matters, because it does. And I love that idea. I love that whole idea of you've just got to read as widely as possible. But can we talk about literary influences for a second? There have to be a few that you hold close.
I mean, I read voraciously. I didn't always. I was not the kid with the flashlight under the mattress. I had a television in my room as a kid. I don't know why any parent would do that, but I just, yeah. So I wasn't that person. I really became a voracious reader in my early 20s, in no small part because my stepmother was a bookstore owner, and she would just press these incredible books into my hands. And I still remember those first. I mean, Jim Harrison, Alice Hoffman, Barbara Kingsolver. And at the same time, I also got into reading in high school, but the very high drama, the sort of The Heart of Darkness and Anna Karenina. Both my parents were writers of different sorts. My father wrote fiction, but he was also a journalist and was wrote for the New Yorker for years and years and years, staff writer there. My mother wrote food and travel pieces. So I think in that way of separation, I was like, not doing that. I'm going my own way. I went in an entirely different direction, sort of a save the world public policy type of thing, and then realized, that the political journals were always going down on the bedside where the literary journals were all going up. And I just started reading and reading and reading. I love poetry and always read poetry just a little bit, can't do too much, but I read poetry regularly for language, for inspiration that way. Mary Oliver is obviously, with her Cape Cod, she's a kindred spirit. Auden reliably brings me to tears every time. I love Jericho Brown, Ada Limon, Tracy K. Smith. I'm just thinking of how they get to what's essential in their poems. I am a huge devotee of family dramas, obviously. I love memoir, but I also just love any family drama. So The Prince of Tides. I just finished The Covenant of Water. I love Bliss and Sorrow. I'm waiting for Tayari Jones's next book.
Oh,
Bated Breath.
Right there with you, right there with you, on the edge of my seat, waiting for that D.R.E. Jones. Yes,
anything by Anne Patchett, Elizabeth McCracken. So the North Star book changes, regularly. I feel like I'm part of a conversation with many, many authors, that we all sort of write when we admire bits that they've done so well in their books. I feel so grateful that I really found and discovered and was able to turn away from my political career
right.
and just race back towards publishing, which I've really been in since my late 20s, and have had a wonderful career. I mean, really have enjoyed. I've never been bored a moment.
Right. That's the thing about books. Like,
that's the thing about
there is no way to be bored. I get excited thinking about it. I mean, this is why I'm a bookseller.
Even now, like, one of the things I do for Aspen Words is we have an annual literary prize called the Aspen Words Literary Prize, and it's for a work of fiction that sheds a light on a social issue. And so every year I read, the long list, which is, 10 to 20 books that are just so wonderful, and by some debut authors, some established authors. But I really love, and my literary career outside of writing has really always been about discovery and discovering new voices.
Right. That talent development. It's great when you're right, but sometimes, you think, oh, this is the one, and then you have failure to launch. And I am not going to mention any of that, but there are times in my previous life, I was the director of the Discover Great New Writers program here. And I mean, there were times where I would get so excited about something. Oh, and this is
going to be it.
And then the universe did not agree.
Honestly, also, though, it takes a certain amount of fairy dust for any book to take off. And it's a process.
And when you're right, it's glorious. And when the stars align and everything just happens in all of the ways that you can hope, and then readers are walking around saying, oh, this one, I get really excited just thinking about the whole process. But the reality is that as much as I believe there is a book for every reader, which I genuinely believe that, making the noise is a little harder than I would like.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
For sure.
It's complicated, and it's complicated for the people who are writing reviews, and it's complicated for outlets. And it's just, I sort of miss that moment where, you could just stumble across something in some paper or some journal, and it just feels like
that's the one.
the same voices over again.
Yeah.
And I miss that serendipity. I kind of miss that serendipity of, who are you?
Well, and hopefully it's happening a little bit via social media where people are just, this sort of able to express, bookstagrammers and so on. And you find people who are aligned with your taste, but there's so few papers compared to, I don't know, 20 years ago when reviews, you just pour over them.
It's just that stumbling across things too, where you would find something sort of off the book page and think, who are you? Do I need to read you?
Yeah.
Do you miss the Gardners?
No. Yeah. I mean, I had a good long run with them. I was with them from 2020, and I will be with them through this book tour. Right. And, I mean, I'm sure you know this so well, but the book you write is never the book anyone else reads. Like we all read a different book. So people will be telling me what they took away from this family for a long time. And although I'm not ready to talk about it, I have been noticing my brain landing and landing and landing in a little spot that's got a different family and different people that's populating it. So I'm sort of thinking about moving on. I haven't started writing yet, but it's a nice feeling to notice it. I feel like Mary Oliver said it best. She said, pay attention, be astonished, write about it. I love that.
And lucky us that you take that advice, luckily.
Yes.
I want to go back to the Gardners for a second, though, because part of me wonders if they're okay, right? Like, I'm pretty sure Abby's okay, right? I'm pretty sure Jenny's okay. I think Ken's going to be okay in the long run. And Adam, I'm like,
Well, I think Adam's got to let go of the dream. I mean, I'm looking ahead in Adam's life, but I think it's never easy to get old. I think it's hard to have your relevance and importance sort of fade, especially when you've been, a contender.
Yes.
And I think these are hard life lessons. This might be a bit about having taken care of, I'm in the process of taking care of elderly people, but it's really difficult. It is so hard to get old. And I think, probably in your 70s and 80s, you are really aware of what's ahead. I hope Adam can find some peace.
Would you ever write about them? I sort of feel like you're done, that this is the story you needed to tell and we're good.
This particular moment in their life is complete. I mean, when I think of who has stuff left to say, I feel like Jenny's got some things she might want to talk about, although I haven't really thought about that yet. Maybe one of those twins is going to show up again.
Right.
Who knows? It is a mystery how it all works.
Those girls they're good characters. They're really, really good characters.
Thank you.
Can we go back to process for a second, though?
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, we've talked about the literary inspiration, but I really do want to talk about the work because, again, there was never a point where I felt like I could see, it partially comes from reading a lot, right? Like sometimes you can see where someone had to sort of pivot where they weren't planning to, or maybe you needed just a little extra, But how much of the writing for you is rewriting? How much of the actual book, Little Monsters, that we're holding isn't what you'd planned?
That's a great question. Everyone writes so differently. I am one of the people who believe in discipline sort of above all else. I don't go chasing the muse. I sit down in the same place at the same time every day and wait for her to catch up. But once I am engaged, once the concept is sort of in my head, it is all I think about. And so every conversation, every sappy TV commercial, every book I read, every conversation I overhear, it all contributes. So it's a very holistic feeling of writing. So the writing doesn't just take place during the 2 hours. I mean, if I get up from 5 and I write from 5 to 7 before the household wakes up, a lot of work happens then, but a lot of work happens when I'm reading or when I'm taking a walk in the woods. And I feel like, especially with fiction, because like with memoir, you still have to have great instincts and good writing chops and everything else to write a great book. But with fiction, you also have to allow for this elusive, crazy creative process to take place. And I liken it a lot. It feels like, that feeling when you wake up in the morning and you've had a dream and you just like, it's just out of your grasp. Like that is the way I feel almost all the time. I wish I were someone who did write the sloppy draft and go back and edit the bejesus out of it.
Right.
I am not.
Okay.
It's not that it ever comes out perfect on the first draft. Like, no way. I write very slowly. When people talk about their 10,000 word days or even 1,000 word days, I just want to shoot them because I'm probably on my best day, I write 1 page, possibly 2. Often I like delete 2 pages.
Okay.
But I feel like until I have a solid foundation, like I'm more of an architect. If I know that this foundation is going to hold the first floor, then I can proceed. And if it still feels wobbly and uncertain, like I just have to shore it up. It doesn't need to be perfect in terms of language yet, but it needs to be solid so it can withstand everything I'm going to build on top of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how it feels for me. So often I start with kind of slim chapters that I build out. I'm neither a big outliner but I'm also not one of those people who just writes down every rabbit hole and has a 3,000 page manuscript that then they find the gems in it. I don't know what I am.
Like you, I enjoy a good family story, but I do need a family story to be well told. I mean, yes, there are, man dies, woman gets married. There are certain sort of story elements, right? That guy walks into a bar, woman leaves her husband. Like, so if you're going to use a family story as a framework, it helps to remember you're still building a world, right? Like, I feel like we've totally let that language be co-opted by very specifically science fiction and fantasy.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to have robots
to be a world building.
World building. I mean, if I buy into what you're giving me, right? Like, I have not been to the Cape in a million years, but there are elements that are recognizable to me as the Cape, certainly, but also there are just plenty of elements that I recognize because you've written about a piece of the world that I know enough about. The humanity of your characters, right? I'm like, oh, I get you people.
Yeah.
And then I don't, and then I do, and then I don't, because that's the joy of reading, right? Like, you're on the journey with these people. And as much as you've given us the additional knowledge that they do not have, which is part of the fun there, I'm very grounded in the world of Little Monsters. I'm very, very grounded in these people, and I'm grounded in the setting, and I'm grounded in what you're doing as the narrative voice. It's so fun. It's so fun. Even when I had moments where I was like, I need to punt this person.
Yes.
I really need to punt this person. This behavior is atrocious, but true to the story.
Atrocious and familiar, too.
And again, we will have a larger conversation, obviously, with Book Club when we can do spoilers, because there are a couple of things I'd really like to ask you about as the writer. So I'm going to try and dance around it before I let you get back to things, because I realize we're, of course, running out of time. But for you, when you're sitting with this, right, and obviously there are big cultural and social themes that you're playing with, and I'm not going to go into it here, but some of it is represented by Ken, some of it is represented by Abby, but everyone has, shall we say, a larger social conflict, right? And certainly your day job with the Aspen Literary Prize and working in that social space, right? The social fiction space. How do you, though, as the writer, just let the characters in the story go where it needs to go? Because clearly there's always stuff happening in the back of your brain. Like, between you noticing everything, right, and reading everything, there seems like there's always a slow burn in the back of your brain. So how do you just let the work be the work?
I could answer that question. I do think it's in this elusive, amorphous, I'm not sure what the right word is, but this state of of both leading and being led, being willing to be led by your characters, trusting them. I mean, there is really something about trusting the process, which sounds so woo-woo and wacky. And I remember just how much I used to hate when someone would talk about, well, there are characters. Hold on. I was just like, oh God. But I mean, there's truth to it. You have to be your best self. You have to be in control and open. One of the things that I find interesting is I feel like readers a lot of times want to know, who's your character? Is your character modeled on someone or something like that? And the fact is, even if you have that at the beginning of the book, at your thought, like, okay, he can be like the grumpy librarian or something rather. Like, so quickly, if you're writing deeply and well and immersively, they do become something more. I also think, one of the hidden truths is, it's like, what part of yourself is actually in each character? Because I got to tell you, there are bits of me in Abby, in Adam, in Ken, in Steph, like Jenny. I am all over each of them, much more so than I could say, well, Jenny is my third cousin, Frances or something.
I also find it funny when people say, well, such and such character is me. And I'm like, okay, you think whatever you need to think. I'm pretty sure that's probably not the case. Because, I mean, you spend enough time talking to writers and they're like, yeah, I just did a thing. And it's kind of delightful watching people say, or everyone brings what they are going to bring to
everyone brings what they're going to bring, and they read what they're, I literally, one family member who I will just say I adore, and they never came into my head at all in writing this book, was like, I saw what you did with me on, very minor character. And I was like, oh, okay. If you think that, that's great.
Okay, I realize, yeah, and like I said earlier, we are, of course, running out of time, but I really like Steph, and I just want to drop her in to this piece. And I know she has, her outsider status, but did she surprise you at all? Or did you just kind of know that she was just going to get in there and kind of upset the apple cart?
Me all the time. And she is the outsider and has the outsider perspective, so she can see this family much better than they can see themselves, which I really loved about her. I sort of almost thought she might be what a reader might be in some ways, but the thing that surprised me about her and that I loved about her was she sort of illustrated how we are all born into families and we all tend to follow the rules and the structure of our families. And she was just a tough cookie who was kind of questioning that. Why? Do we have to? I don't think so. So
she was fun. I'm glad I met her too. I'm not sure. Well, we're going to find out at book club. Okay. We're going to totally find out at book club. You and I get to have a total. This is kind of the fun of the thing. It's like every time you read something, you get to have a different conversation.
Yes.
That's the fun of a book club, man. So if you're not in a book club, come join us. Anyway, Adrienne Brodeur, it was so lovely to have this time with you. Thank you so much. And thank you for Little Monsters and Wild Game. And, wow. But before I really let you go, well, you sort of hinted there was something next. I suppose I can't push.
No, you can't do that. But okay. I will just say thank you to Barnes & Noble for picking this book. I am so grateful. But I also just will say, you guys have been there through every step in my career at different moments. So the Discover New Writers with my first novel, events with my second, this with this book. So I'm so grateful. You do a lot for readers and writers.
Thank you.
Hi, readers. It's time for another TBR Topoff. We're going to recommend a couple of great books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of Little Monsters. I'm Mark at my Barnes & Noble in Cincinnati, and I'm joined by my book buddy, Jamie. Hello, Jamie.
Hi, Mark. I'm Jamie. I am at my Barnes & Noble in Leawood, Kansas.
So we've got a couple of great books to talk about. Jamie, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
All right, absolutely. So I think if you have finished Little Monsters and you've torn through that and you find that you need even more strained adult siblings reconnect with their peculiar father in exotic American locales, you're in luck because I have a perfect book for you, and that's The Great Offshore Grounds by Vanessa Veselka. This is a gorgeous novel, inside and out, and it was published back in 2021 and was nominated for the National Book Award. And I'll just point out that that's an award for which Adrienne Brodeur is a judge. So I think I like the symmetry of these two authors and books together. So this is a beautiful family drama about two sisters and their close relationship. One is a capable Seattle-based shipwright and a wannabe Alaskan fisherwoman, and her name is Livy. And she is playing hostess to her down on her luck, a sister Cheyenne, who's fresh out of a failed marriage. The two have not spent time together in years, but through the course of this novel, they embark on a land and sea cross-country road trip, out into the ocean road trip. They go together after their father kind of drops a bombshell into their lives, a name that could change everything they know. And so the story is that his daughters were born to two different mothers on the same day. And Kirsten, the mother who raised them as sisters, is actually only a biological mother to one of them, and they don't know which daughter is hers. Add their adopted brother Essex, who was brought into the family as an adolescent, and if you add him into the mix with the estranged father, you're going to have really the makings of a pretty epic family drama at this point. The story also then doesn't unfold in a typical way. This is really an Odyssey kind of book. The sisters begin this journey. They're flat broke and their dad's getting married. They're hoping to get some money from him when instead they get this piece of information. And while this is a beautiful kind of epic Odyssey, it is also gritty and tough. Their lives are complicated. Their relationships in and outside the family are fraught. Their troubles have piled up and they desperately need some financial stability. And when it turns out that's not what this wedding of their fathers is going to provide, they have to take that information instead and head out into the world together. And they get help from their sweet brother Essex, go on a search for answers about the mother that they all love and the other mother who left. So they crisscross the country and take to the sea on this quest. There's a ton of research into boats and boating, which is actually fascinating and impressive. And the book is beautifully written, of course, but it's the terrifically real characters and their just intense sisterly bond, despite all the troubles and strangeness that they've endured that really sticks with you. So we love these messy people. And by the end of this book, we are just in their corner fully. We're rooting for them. And again, that's The Great Offshore Grounds by Vanessa Veselka. Mark?
Fantastic. I've been wanting to read that. So I think I'm bumping that up on my pile because it's been on my mind for a bit. So thank you for just replenishing my TBR brain at all times. So I was thinking about the way that families can feel different and what shapes a family can take, and how the natural world can affect a family and how a family can affect the natural world around them. It was a very obvious choice for me. I just finished this book 2 days ago and it is screaming to be talked about. I have been basically grabbing people up by the shoulders just to get them to read this. And that is Seven Steeples by the magnificent Sarah Baum. I love this author so much. So the book follows a couple, Belle and Cy, as they have left sort of what they would consider, what many would consider the social norms. They've left their job, they've left their family, they've left their social connections to move to a very small home in the rural Irish countryside at the base of a small mountain. Their goal really is to just shed everything around them people-wise and focus on each other and the land around them. Baum has a quote and she writes, a refuge, a cult, a church of two, that was their experiment. And the way that these two characters start out with, I would say maybe some lofty expectations, and then the way that they grow into a pair that becomes almost a single person is absolutely gorgeous. I think it's a story of isolation, of one-on-one connection that grows into something very, very powerful and something that you don't often see in a coupling. But man, it is beautifully told. The way that Baum constructs and then deconstructs a sentence always amazes me. There are times when you're reading a paragraph and you get to the end and she breaks up the actual placing of the words in the sentence for amazing impact. It's a very profound look at the way that two people can butt their own sensibilities up against what a lot of people will consider the norm. The way that you can consider what community and family and togetherness really looks like, plus the way that she builds the voice of these characters through a third-person perspective is so impressive to me. I love the way she writes. Truly, I think anybody should just pick up this book. For really, the first page is just gorgeous, and you will be treated through the rest of your reading experience. I love Sarah Baum again. I can't get enough of her always, but this book is really just screaming at me right now. And I love the way that she is quiet and calm in the way that she writes, and that builds such an effective narrative without even having to try. It seems effortless and gorgeous. So if you want a unique take on family, please check out Seven Steeples by Sarah Baum. Yay.
You sold me.
It's so good.
I'm going to run right out there and
please do. Anything she writes is magnificent, but this is a really special one. And I think a nice tie to just talking about family drama in general and what that can mean and what that can look like in so many different ways. But that is all we have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. Pretty simple. I'm Mark. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester.
And I'm Jamie. You can follow my home store at BN Leawood KS.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Happy reading. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.